The airport buzzed with the usual chaos of rolling suitcases, boarding calls, and impatient travelers, but all eyes suddenly turned to one woman at the security checkpoint. Dressed in designer clothes, sunglasses perched on her head, Karen refused to let her handbag pass through the scanner. "This is a private bag," she snapped at the officer, clutching it to her chest like a secret treasure. The security guard, a calm yet firm man named Officer Malik, politely explained that everyone had to follow the rules, but Karen wasn't having it. Her voice grew louder, echoing through the terminal. "Do you know who I am?" Passengers froze. Phones started recording. What started as a simple routine check spiraled into pure chaos. The tension was thick. A line of travelers stretched back as people whispered and exchanged glances. Malik warned her again, but Karen doubled down, demanding to speak to someone important. That's when the supervisor arrived and, without another word, he gave a nod. Two security guards stepped forward, took the bag from her trembling hands, and placed it on the table. When they unzipped it, the entire airport seemed to hold its breath. The moment the bag opened, gasps filled the air. Karen's face drained of color. It wasn't jewelry or valuables inside, it was something much stranger. People leaned closer, desperate to see what she was hiding. The scene went from entitled argument to utter shock in seconds. Cameras flashed, whispers turned into shouts, and Karen realized too late her secret had just been torn apart in front of everyone. The morning sun spread golden light across the sprawling glass roof of the city's international airport. It was one of those perfectly busy days when everything ran like a well-rehearsed machine, passengers rushing with rolling suitcases, the echo of flight announcements bouncing through the wide halls, and the faint scent of freshly brewed coffee from the cafes near the entrance. The air buzzed with a strange mix of excitement and exhaustion. People were heading toward vacations, business meetings, or reunions, each lost in their own little world. Amid this hum of movement, one woman walked as if she owned the place. Her name was Karen Whitmore, and she carried herself with an air of self-importance that turned heads. She was dressed in a crisp white blazer, diamond studs glinting in her ears, and her hair styled so precisely it seemed not a single strand dared to move. In her manicured hands, she held a luxury designer handbag, glossy black leather, gold buckles shining like trophies. To her, it wasn't just a bag. It was a symbol of her status. Karen hated airports. She hated the waiting, the lines, the noise, and above all the rules. She believed rules were for ordinary people, not for her. So as she approached the security checkpoint, her mind was already irritated by the thought of removing her shoes, emptying her pockets, and placing her precious belongings on a conveyor belt. The line at the scanner moved smoothly until Karen reached the front. The security officer on duty, Officer Malik, greeted her with a polite smile. He was in his late 30s, tall and composed. The kind of man who had seen every possible kind of traveler: nervous, rude, anxious, arrogant. He motioned toward the gray plastic tray on the counter. "Good morning, ma'am. Please place your bag in the tray and send it through the scanner." Karen didn't move. Instead, she tilted her sunglasses down slightly and gave him a look that could freeze water. "I don't think that's necessary," she said, her voice calm but dismissive. "There's nothing dangerous in my bag." Malik had heard that line 1,000 times. His expression didn't change. "I understand, ma'am, but we have to scan all bags. It's standard procedure." Karen's lips tightened. "This is a private bag," she replied, emphasizing the word private as if it carried more weight than security laws. "I have very personal items inside, and I don't want them exposed or handled by strangers." The passengers behind her shifted uncomfortably. The line was beginning to grow longer, and people started exchanging looks. Some sighed, some checked their watches, and a few began recording discreetly with their phones. Sensing drama, Malik maintained his professional tone. "I understand your concern, but your belongings will not be touched. The bag just needs to pass through the scanner for inspection." Karen scoffed, her heels clicking as she turned slightly to face the people behind her. "This is ridiculous," she declared loudly, as if she were addressing an audience. "I've traveled through airports all over the world, and no one has ever made such a fuss about my bag." A man in the line muttered under his breath. "Then she must have skipped security everywhere else." A few quiet chuckles followed, but Karen ignored them. "I'm sorry, ma'am," Malik said firmly. "Rules are the same for everyone." That was the wrong thing to say to Karen. Her posture stiffened, and her voice rose an octave. "Everyone. Do you even know who I am?" At that moment, Malik felt the familiar weight of trouble settling in. He'd seen this type before: entitled, temperamental, convinced that authority didn't apply to them. He raised his hand slightly, signaling to his colleague at the next checkpoint to stay alert. "Ma'am," he said gently, "I don't need to know who you are. I just need you to follow the same procedure as the rest of our passengers." Karen's eyes flashed with anger. "Unbelievable," she hissed, clutching her handbag tighter. "You're wasting my time." She glanced at her gold watch as if it validated her importance. The scene was growing tense. The security area was now filled with the soft hum of whispers, A mother in the line behind her tried to distract her little boy, who kept staring at the confrontation. A young couple took a step back, their boarding passes clutched in hand, worried they might miss their flight because of this delay. Bollock decided to give her one last chance. "Ma'am," he said evenly, "if you don't wish to have your bag scanned, I'll have to call a supervisor to assist. But the policy will remain the same." Karen crossed her arms defiantly. "Then call whoever you need to. I'm not letting anyone put this bag through a machine. It could damage its hits worth more than your entire paycheck." The insult stung, but Malik kept his expression neutral. He'd been trained to handle worse. Still, he could feel the energy in the air shifting. What began as an ordinary morning was quickly turning into a scene that would be talked about for days. As Malik reached for his radio to call for backup, Karen leaned over the counter and hissed, "You're making a big mistake." "Officer," Malik responded calmly. "Ma'am, the only mistake would be refusing to follow airport regulations." A few people in the crowd nodded quietly. The murmurs grew louder. Someone whispered, "Why is she being so difficult?" While another person muttered, "Just scan the bag already." But Karen wasn't listening to anyone. Her pride had taken over. Her voice grew sharper, her gestures more dramatic. "You people are all the same, power-hungry and disrespectful. I will report you for this humiliation." By now Malik's supervisor, Officer Farah, had noticed the commotion from her desk across the hall. She was a composed woman in her 40s, known for her steady authority and calm demeanor. As she approached the checkpoint, the tension seemed to ease slightly, though Karen immediately turned to her, pointing a finger. "Finally, someone in charge. This man is being completely unreasonable." Farah gave a patient smile. "Good morning, ma'am. I'm Officer Farah, the shift supervisor. Can you please tell me what seems to be the problem?" Karen exhaled dramatically. "This officer is demanding that I put my personal bag through that scanner. I have private items inside. I will not allow it." Farah listened quietly, then said in a soft but firm voice, "Ma'am, airport policy requires all bags regardless of ownership, brand, or contents to be scanned before boarding. No exceptions." Karen blinked, as if she hadn't heard correctly. "No exceptions? That's ridiculous." Farah's tone didn't change. "It's about safety, ma'am, not convenience." The line had now grown to nearly 20 people. A few were recording openly. Karen noticed and turned away, hiding her face behind her sunglasses. Her voice dropped to a hiss. "You're making a scene," Farah replied calmly. "You're the one refusing a lawful request. Ma'am, please cooperate, or we'll have to perform a manual inspection." Karen's knuckles whitened as she gripped the handles of her handbag. Her pulse quickened. She didn't want anyone touching what was inside. "No one touches this bag," she muttered through clenched teeth. Farah exchanged a quiet glance with Malik. Something about Karen's nervousness didn't seem like mere stubborn pride. There was fear. There's something else beneath the surface. The sunlight from the tall windows poured across the checkpoint, highlighting Karen's pale face and the tightness in her jaw. The airport had gone unusually quiet for such a busy morning. Every eye seemed to be on her now. And in that moment, standing in the bright morning glare with the weight of every stare pressing down on her, Karen realized something she hadn't expected. She was no longer in control. Her hand trembled slightly as she pulled the handbag closer to her chest. Malik waited patiently. Farah gave one final warning. "Ma'am, this is your last chance to cooperate. Please place the bag on the scanner." Karen didn't move. The moment hung thick in the air, stretched by tension and pride. Then, with a cold, defiant glare, she said quietly but firmly, "No." And that one word set the chain of events in motion that would soon make headlines. The air around the security checkpoint seemed to vibrate with tension. What had started as a simple delay had now turned into a full-blown standoff. The morning sunlight streamed in through the tall airport windows, bright and harsh, glinting off the metal detector gates and polished floors. People in line shifted restlessly, their travel plans frozen in the middle of one woman's defiance. Karen Whitmore stood with her back straight and her chin lifted high, clutching her glossy black handbag to her chest like a shield. Her expression was a mix of arrogance and growing fear. The word "no" still hung in the air, sharp and echoing. Officer Malik stood a few feet away, calm but alert, while his supervisor, Officer Farah, watched her carefully. "Ma'am," Malik said in a measured voice, "you're obstructing the line. Please, just place your bag on the scanner so we can all move forward." Karen snapped her sunglasses off and glared at him. "I told you already. I'm not putting my bag through that machine. Do you understand English, or do I need to repeat myself again?" Her voice rose so suddenly that the nearby passengers flinched. A few people gasped. Someone at the back whispered, "Oh, she's going to regret this." Another person muttered, "I'm missing my flight because of this woman." Farah's tone remained calm, professional. "Ma'am, this is your final warning. If you continue to refuse, we'll be forced to open the bag manually under security supervision." Karen's eyes widened, and for the first time there was a flicker of panic. She clutched the handles tighter, her fingers digging into the leather. "You are not touching my bag," she barked. "This is a designer handbag. Do you have any idea how much it costs? You're not even qualified to handle something like this." Malik's jaw tightened slightly. "We're not here to damage your belongings, ma'am. We're here to keep everyone safe." Karen laughed an exaggerated, disbelieving sound. "Safe? From what? My lipstick, my wallet. This is harassment." The young couple who had been behind her earlier exchanged glances. The woman whispered, "She's really losing it." The man nodded. "If she doesn't stop, they're going to take her away." Meanwhile, the tension in the air continued to thicken. A few airport staff members had paused nearby, pretending to check their stations but clearly watching the drama unfold. Two security guards lingered near the corner, waiting for Farah's signal. "Ma'am," Farah said again, her voice now firmer, "you're disrupting airport security operations. I'm asking you one last time to cooperate." Karen's face reddened. Her pride refused to let her back down. "You can't talk to me like that. I'll have your job for this." Farah didn't flinch. "I'm simply enforcing the rules. If you don't comply, I'll have no choice but to involve airport police." That word police hit Karen like a slap. She stiffened. For a brief second, her expression cracked, and something like fear passed through her eyes, but she quickly masked it with another burst of outrage. "Oh, please," she scoffed. "Go ahead. Call whoever you want. I have nothing to hide." Malik's radio crackled softly as another officer reported that the checkpoint line was now backing up toward the main terminal. Passengers were grumbling, checking watches, and complaining to staff. It was becoming a scene. Karen turned toward the crowd, desperate for validation. "If you all see what's happening, right? This is abuse of power. I'm being treated like a criminal." But the reaction wasn't what she hoped for. A man holding a briefcase muttered, "Lady, just scan your bag and move on." Another woman said loudly, "Some of us have flights to catch." Karen's face flushed deeper. She looked back at Malik, her tone trembling between anger and desperation. "You have no right to invade my privacy." Malik took a deep breath, trying to remain calm. "Ma'am, the scanner doesn't reveal personal details, it only detects potential threats. If your bag is clear, you can continue on your way." But Karen wasn't listening anymore. Her heart was pounding, her palms sweaty. She glanced down at the bag briefly, then back at Malik. "I said no," she shouted again. "You people just want to humiliate me." At this point, Farah gave a quiet nod to the guards nearby. Two officers approached slowly, their posture firm but not. "Ma'am," one of them said, "please step aside. We're going to perform a manual check." Karen's voice cracked as she yelled, "Don't touch it." She pulled the bag closer, almost hugging it. The move looked less like confidence now and more like fear. Passengers began recording openly. Phones were raised, flashes blinking. The situation was spiraling out of control. Farah stepped closer, her voice softer now. "Karen, listen to me. No one is trying to harm you. Just let us check your bag and you'll be free to go. You're making this harder for yourself." But Karen's mind was spinning. She felt trapped between her pride, her fear, and the hundreds of eyes staring at her. She could feel the heat of the sun on her back through the glass windows, the burn of humiliation on her skin. She had built her life around controlling situations, people, and appearances. But now, in the middle of an airport, she was losing every bit of it. "You can't do this to me," she shouted, her voice trembling. "This is illegal." Farah nodded to Malik. "Proceed," she said quietly. Malik took a slow step forward. "Ma'am, please set the bag down." Karen backed up a step. Her pulse raced. "Don't come near me." The guards moved closer. One of them reached gently for the bag. Karen's hand shook. She glanced around desperately for support, but the crowd's faces were cold and distant now. The sympathy she'd tried to win had evaporated. Malik spoke softly, trying one last time. "Ma'am, please. You're only making this worse." Karen hesitated for a heartbeat then. In a sudden burst of emotion, she shouted, "Fine, do whatever you want, but when you see what's inside, you'll regret it." Her voice cracked on the last word. She slammed the bag down on the counter, her hands trembling. The loud thud echoed through the security area. Farah signaled to the nearest officer, who reached for the zipper. Karen turned her face away, her jaw clenched tight. The officer began unzipping the bag carefully, the faint sound of metal teeth sliding filling the tense silence. The crowd leaned forward. Even the constant hum of airport noise seemed to fade for a moment. Karen closed her eyes, her breathing shallow. She could hear the faint rattle of glass bottles inside the bag. Malik noticed the sound too. He frowned slightly but said nothing. Farah glanced at Karen. "Ma'am, is there anything in this bag we should know about before we open it fully?" Karen didn't answer. Her lips parted slightly, but no words came out. The zipper reached the end, and the bag was opened just a few inches. Malik's eyes narrowed as he caught sight of something glinting under the light. He looked at Farah, who gave him a small nod. They both leaned closer, peering into the bag but before they could lift anything out. Karen suddenly reached forward and slammed it shut again, shouting, "Stop, don't touch it." Gasps rippled through the crowd. The two guards quickly stepped in, holding her back gently but firmly. The scene was now beyond recovery. Phones recorded every second. Farah looked at her, disappointment in her eyes. "Ms. Whitmore, you've left us no choice." Karen froze, her chest heaving. "No choice for what?" she whispered. Malik radioed for airport police. "We have a non-compliant passenger at gate security line B," he said, requesting immediate assistance. The sound of his calm voice over the radio hit Karen harder than shouting ever could. She stood there trembling, surrounded by strangers, her perfect morning completely shattered. Outside the tall glass windows, the bright sunlight continued to flood the airport, pure and indifferent to the drama unfolding below. Inside, Karen Whitmore's world was beginning to crumble, and she still had no idea how much worse it was about to get. The moment Officer Malik called for airport police, the entire security area fell into uneasy silence. Even the mechanical hum of the conveyor belts seemed to pause. Dozens of passengers stood frozen, watching the scene unfold like a movie. Some held their phones high, recording the confrontation that had now dragged on far longer than anyone expected. The morning sunlight flooded through the large glass windows, sharp and bright, casting long shadows across the checkpoint floor. Karen Whitmore stood trembling, her bag still pressed against the counter, her knuckles white around the handles. Her defiance had cracked into panic. The confidence she'd worn like armor was fading fast. Behind her sunglasses, her eyes darted between the officers, searching for a way out, but there was none. Officer Farah stepped closer, her calm presence now taking full command of the scene. Her voice, though gentle, carried authority. "Ms. Whitmore, this has gone far enough. The more you resist, the more complicated this becomes. Please step aside and allow us to inspect your bag." Karen shook her head quickly, her voice trembling. "You don't understand. You can't just go through my personal things." Farah's gaze softened. "Then explain. Ms. Whitmore, what's in there that's making you so afraid?" That question hit like a thunderclap. For a moment, Karen froze completely. Her lips parted, but no words came. Her throat tightened, her heart pounding so hard she thought the people nearby might hear it. What could she say? The truth wasn't something she was ready to admit, not here, not in front of cameras and strangers. "I have valuable items," she stammered finally. "They're fragile. If your people touch them, they'll break." Malik's eyes narrowed slightly. "Fragile items don't make that kind of noise." "Ma'am," he said. "We heard bottles clinking." "What kind of bottles are those?" Karen flinched. "Perfumes," she said quickly. "They're all perfume bottles. I collect them. They're rare and expensive. If they break, you'll be paying for them." Farah exchanged a skeptical glance with Malik. "Then you won't mind us confirming that," she said. Karen's jaw tightened. "You can't. I forbid it." The word forbid hung heavy in the air. It was the final straw. Farah nodded to the two guards who had been standing close by. "Please secure the bag," she ordered quietly. "Don't touch it," Karen cried, but the guards had already moved. They approached her slowly, one on each side, calm and professional. The passengers watching murmured among themselves. Some felt pity, others irritation, but most were simply curious what was in that bag that had this woman so terrified. One of the guards gently pulled the handbag away from Karen's grip. She resisted for a second, then finally let go with a strangled gasp. Her hands fell limp at her sides. She looked defeated, her shoulders sagging. Officer Malik placed the bag flat on the inspection table, while Farah watched closely. He unzipped it slowly. The metallic sound of the zipper slicing through the tense air. Karen squeezed her eyes shut, whispering under her breath, "Please don't do this. Please don't do this." When the zipper finally reached the end, Malik carefully lifted the flap. Inside, several small glass bottles were neatly arranged, wrapped in silk scarves and tissues. The sunlight caught them, scattering tiny reflections across the table. At first glance, it did look like a perfume collection. The bottles were elegant crystal-clear glass with fancy caps, some even labeled with famous brand names. But something was off. There were no boxes, no packaging, and some bottles had labels that looked slightly crooked or uneven. Malik frowned and picked one up gently. He turned it toward the light. The liquid inside was clear to clear. He unscrewed the cap and sniffed cautiously. It didn't smell like perfume. There was no floral scent. No sweetness, only the sharp sting of alcohol mixed with something chemical. "This doesn't seem like perfume," he said quietly. Karen's eyes flew open. "Put that down," she shouted, her voice echoing across the hall. "You're contaminating it. Those are..." Farah folded her arms. "Custom-made perfumes that smell like rubbing alcohol?" she asked, her tone calm but suspicious. Karen's face turned pale. "They're special blends. You wouldn't understand." Malik set the bottle down and picked up another. This one had no label at all. He tilted it gently, watching how the liquid moved. It was thicker than water, almost syrupy. "Ma'am," he said, "are you sure these are perfumes?" "Yes," Karen snapped. "Now give them back." Farah leaned in, studying the bottles. "There are too many of these for personal use," she said softly. "And they're all unlabeled or relabeled. Ms. Whitmore, I need to be honest with you. This looks suspicious." Karen's lips trembled. "Suspicious? You think I'm what? A criminal?" "No one's saying that," Farah replied evenly. "But these bottles will need to be tested. You're carrying more than the legal liquid limit, and their contents are questionable." Karen's voice rose in panic. "No, you can't test them. They'll be ruined." "Ma'am," Malik said gently, "it's standard procedure. If everything's fine, you'll get your bag back shortly. But Karen's breathing was growing faster. She took a step backward, her mind spinning. She imagined the chemical tests revealing everything, her little side business. The truth about what those bottles really contained. For months, she'd been blending and selling imported perfumes to high-end clients, but the truth was far more illegal. The bottles were filled with high-proof alcohol and synthetic ingredients she wasn't licensed to handle. She'd packed them, hoping to take them to another country for a deal, certain she could charm her way through security. But now, everything was falling apart before her eyes. "Stop," she cried again, her voice cracking. "You're making a mistake." Farah's eyes softened, though her expression remained firm. "Ms. Whitmore, if there's something you need to tell us, now is the time. It will be easier for everyone if you're honest." Karen shook her head violently. "I'm not saying anything. You're all trying to frame me." The guard stepped closer again, sensing her distress might turn into resistance. Farah raised a hand to keep them steady. "No one's framing you," she said gently, "but you've put us in a position where we have to act." She nodded to Malik, who carefully resealed one of the bottles and placed it into a transparent evidence pouch. "We'll have the lab confirm what's inside," he said. Karen's voice dropped to a whisper. "You don't need to do that." Farah looked at her. "Then tell us what we'll find." For a long, tense moment, Karen said nothing. She just stared at the bag, her reflection trembling in the shiny surface of the table. Her hands shook as she finally muttered, "It's just perfume ingredients, that's all." Farah sighed quietly. "All right, ma'am. You'll need to wait here while we verify that." Karen's heart sank. The two guards gently guided her to a nearby chair. The cameras kept rolling. The crowd whispered among themselves, voices low and speculative. "Guess she wasn't hiding jewelry after all," someone muttered. "She's finished," said another. Karen sat down, her mind numb. She stared at the sunlight reflecting off the floor tiles, bright and merciless. Her perfect world of control, appearances, and pride was collapsing. One zipper, one bottle, one truth at a time. And as the officers began sealing her bag for further inspection, Karen realized there was no more running from what was inside. The bag was open, and so was her fate. The airport security room was colder than the rest of the terminal, sterile and quiet, except for the faint hum of an air conditioner. Officer Malik placed Karen's glossy handbag on the examination table while Officer Farah stood nearby, watching carefully. The once bustling checkpoint outside had returned to normal. But inside this small room, the tension still hung thick and heavy. Karen sat on a metal chair in the corner, arms crossed tightly, her eyes darting from one officer to another. The arrogance that had once filled her voice had melted away, replaced by something else: fear. Her hands trembled slightly in her lap, though she tried to hide it. Farah broke the silence first. "Miss Whitmore, I want to remind you that you're not under arrest right now," she said gently. "But you must cooperate. We're just doing our job. Once the liquid in these bottles is verified as harmless, you'll be free to go." Karen forced a tight smile. "I told you already, they're perfumes. Why is this taking so long? I have a flight to catch." Malik glanced up from the table. "It won't take long, ma'am. We just have to be sure. A technician is coming to test the contents." Karen exhaled sharply, drumming her manicured nails against her armrest. Her mind was spinning. If the test revealed what was truly in those bottles, highly concentrated alcohol mixed with chemical extract, she could be charged for smuggling hazardous materials. Worse, she could lose her business contacts and her reputation. Everything she had built, the image she had polished so carefully, would collapse in an instant. A knock came at the door, and a young female technician entered, carrying a small portable analyzer. She nodded to Farah and Malik before setting her case on the table. Karen watched her every move like a hawk. "Let's start with one sample," Farah said. The technician unscrewed a bottle cap carefully. The sharp scent filled the room, immediately strong, stinging, nothing like perfume. Karen swallowed hard. The technician frowned slightly. "This doesn't smell like a cosmetic product," she said softly. She dipped a test strip into the liquid, then inserted it into the analyzer. The small machine beeped as numbers appeared on the screen. Malik leaned over to read them. 70% ethanol, he said. "That's way beyond normal perfume concentration." Karen shifted in her chair. "So what? Some perfumes use strong alcohol bases." Farah raised an eyebrow. "But these bottles have no official branding, no production details, and no import labels. You're carrying over 10 of them, all unlabeled. That's not typical for personal use." Karen's throat went dry. She had rehearsed a dozen excuses before coming to the airport, but now every one of them sounded ridiculous in her mind. "They were gifts," she muttered. "For my clients abroad." Malik looked up. "You're transporting commercial goods without declaration." Then Karen froze. "No, that's not what I meant." The technician continued testing the other bottles one by one. Each test gave a similar result: high ethanol, traces of methanol, and synthetic chemicals unfit for personal use. After the fifth bottle, Farah sighed and looked directly at Karen. "Ms. Whitmore," she said, "these aren't just perfumes. The chemical composition makes them unsafe, possibly flammable. You're carrying unauthorized substances." Karen's heart thudded painfully in her chest. "You're exaggerating," she said weakly. "They're harmless. I made them myself, it's a hobby. Malik exchanged a glance with Farah. Homemade perfumes, he asked, in industrial-strength alcohol, without safety labeling or declaration. Karen's eyes began to fill with tears. She looked away, her voice trembling. You wouldn't understand. I needed to make money. People buy them online. No one's ever gotten hurt. Farah's expression softened slightly. Miss Whitmore, I understand times are hard, but bringing chemical mixtures like this on an international flight is illegal. If one of these bottles leaked or reacted under pressure, it could endanger everyone on board. Karen's lips quivered. I didn't think it was that serious, she whispered. Malik leaned forward. It's not just serious, it's dangerous. These liquids could ignite under the right conditions. The technician carefully sealed the samples in evidence bags, labeling each one. Karen watched in silence, her face pale. The room felt colder now, the air heavier. Farah finally pulled out a chair and sat across from Karen. Tell me the truth, she said quietly. Where were you taking these bottles? Karen stared at the floor. Her thoughts raced. She could lie again, but what was the point? They already had the evidence. Slowly, her voice broke the silence. Dubai, she said. I have a client there who buys my blends. He pays in cash. Farah nodded. And how many times have you done this before? Karen hesitated. Twice, she admitted softly. No one ever stopped me. I thought if I looked respectable, no one would question me. Malik spoke gently. So you relied on your appearance to get past security? Karen nodded weakly. Yes, people don't stop a woman in heels and designer clothes. They stop the ones who look nervous or poor. I used that. Farah sighed and leaned back. There was sadness in her eyes, not anger. You could have hurt a lot of people, Miss Whitmore. Not intentionally. Perhaps, but carelessness is dangerous when you're carrying substances like these. Karen wiped a tear that slipped down her cheek. I was desperate, she murmured. My business was failing. Rent was overdue. I needed quick money, and a friend told me these bottles would sell easily overseas. I didn't think it through. The room went silent again. Malik looked down at the evidence bag, the clear liquid catching the light. It seemed unbelievable that something so ordinary looking could cause so much trouble. Miss Whitmore, Farah said gently, we'll have to file a report. The airport police will speak with you next. You're not being arrested yet, but you can't leave until they've reviewed your case. Karen nodded weakly. The fight had gone out of her. She stared at her handbag, the same one she had defended so fiercely, and felt sick. All that pride, all that anger, all for something so foolish. Farah stood and spoke quietly to Malik, who stepped out to call the airport authorities. Karen remained motionless, her mind drifting. She could almost hear the echoes of her earlier shouting, the whispers of the crowd, the sting of her own words. Do you know who I am? Now, sitting in that cold room, she wished she could take every word back. When Malik returned, 2 officers followed him in. They spoke politely, explaining the next steps. Karen answered in a small voice, nodding, barely listening. The reality was sinking in. There would be reports, fines, maybe even court. Her name might appear in the news. The videos that people recorded at the checkpoint would probably go viral by now. She imagined the captions. Woman refuses bag check, gets caught smuggling illegal liquids. Her stomach turned. Farah gathered the last of the documents and looked at her one final time. Miss Whitmore, I truly hope this becomes a lesson for you, she said softly. Arrogance and fear often make the same mistake. They blind us to reason. Karen lifted her eyes, tears streaking her cheeks. I understand, she whispered. I really do. As the officers led her out toward the administrative office, the sunlight from the terminal spilled into the hallway. It was still a bright, beautiful day outside, not ordinary, but for Karen Whitmore, the light only made everything feel more exposed. Her secrets had been spilled out, her pride dismantled, her life suddenly fragile and uncertain. And as she walked through the busy airport, surrounded by people who now recognized her from the spectacle she'd created, she realized something she'd never admit out loud. Her biggest mistake wasn't the bottles she carried. It was believing that she was untouchable. The next morning, sunlight poured through the tall windows of the airport administration office, turning the tiled floor into a pattern of gold and white. Karen sat quietly at a small wooden table, her eyes swollen from a night without sleep. She had spent hours in a holding room, no handcuffs, no bars, but no freedom either. The weight of her choices sat heavy on her shoulders, pressing down like a stone she couldn't set aside. The officers had been surprisingly kind. They didn't treat her like a criminal, but their professionalism made it clear that this wasn't something she could brush off. When Officer Farah entered the room, holding a clipboard and a soft expression, Karen lifted her head. There was shame in her eyes, but also exhaustion, a look of someone who had finally stopped fighting the inevitable. Good morning, Miss Whitmore, Farah said gently, taking a seat across from her. How are you feeling? Karen gave a weak smile. Like I've been hit by a truck, but I suppose I deserve it. Farah tilted her head. You made a mistake, a serious one, but you owned up to it. That matters. Karen looked down at her trembling hands. I wish I had realized that before yelling at you in front of everyone. Her voice cracked slightly. I've always thought that if I looked confident, if I acted like I was in control, no one could question me. But I see now how wrong I was. Farah folded her arms on the table. People often mistake arrogance for strength, but real strength is admitting when you're wrong. There was silence for a moment. Outside the office, the airport buzzed with life again, families rushing to gates, pilots walking briskly through corridors, the distant hum of announcements echoing through the halls. It was a world moving forward, while Karen had stood still. Malik entered the room next, holding a few sheets of paper. "We've reviewed your case," he said calmly. "You won't be facing criminal charges, but there will be consequences. You'll have to pay a fine and attend a mandatory safety course before you're allowed to travel again." Karen nodded quickly, relief flooding her chest. "Thank you," she said softly. "I'll pay it, whatever it takes." Malik gave her a reassuring nod. "We've also confiscated the liquids. They'll be disposed of properly." Karen looked at him, guilt flickering in her eyes. "I'm sorry," she murmured. "Not just for the bottles, for how I treated everyone. You were just doing your job." Farah smiled faintly. "Apologies go a long way, Ms. Whitmore. Most people never offer them." Karen sighed deeply, her eyes filling again. "You know," she said after a pause, "I used to think rules were for people who didn't know how to get around them. I thought I was being but I was just being selfish and reckless." Malik leaned against the counter, arms folded. "You learned something valuable today, and you're not the first person to think that way. But the truth is, airports, flights, these places only stay safe because everyone follows the same rules. No one is above them." Karen nodded, his words echoing in her mind. No one is above them. It felt like a verdict and a lesson all at once. After signing the final papers and paying her fine, Karen was escorted out toward the public terminal. As they walked, she passed by the same checkpoint where everything had started. The same conveyor belt hummed softly, scanning other passengers' belongings. The same officers greeted travelers with calm professionalism. But everything looked different to her now, brighter, more meaningful, as if she was seeing the process not as an inconvenience, but as protection. Near the exit, Farah stopped her. "Ms. Whitmore," she said quietly, "before you go, there's one more thing I need to say." Karen turned, curious. Farah smiled. "You may feel humiliated now, but someday you'll look back and realize this was the day you became more aware, more grounded. We all need moments like these to grow." Karen nodded slowly. "I think you're right," she said. "I don't know how I'll face people after this, but I'll try to be better." Farah extended her hand. "That's all anyone can ask." Karen shook it, grateful, and then walked toward the terminal doors. Outside, the sun was shining brightly over the city. Planes glided silently across the blue sky, lifting off into the distance. Karen paused near the glass walls and watched one disappear into the horizon. For the first time in a long time, she felt small, but not in a bad way. Small in a way that reminded her she was part of something bigger than herself. As she stepped into a waiting taxi, she took one last look at the airport entrance. The same place that had witnessed her arrogance now stood as the monument of her humility. She smiled faintly, shaking her head at the memory of how foolish she had been. The taxi driver glanced at her through the mirror. "Rough day, Miss." Karen chuckled softly. "Rough lesson," she said. "But I think I needed it." "Ah, those are the ones that stick," the driver replied with a grin as the car pulled away. Karen leaned her head against the window, watching the sunlight reflect off passing cars. Her mind replayed the last 24 hours, the shouting, the humiliation, the truth that had spilled out in that cold room. It wasn't just about the bottles. It was about who she had become and who she needed to be again by the time she reached her apartment. The exhaustion hit her in waves. She unlocked the door, placed her now empty handbag on the table, and sat down in silence. The apartment was filled with half-finished projects, papers, and samples from her struggling perfume business. For a moment, she just stared at them. Then she stood up, gathered every bottle, and carried them to the sink. One by one, she poured them out. The chemical smell rose, then faded. It felt like she was washing away her mistakes literally and symbolically. When the last bottle was empty, she rinsed it, dried her hands, and exhaled deeply. For the first time in months, her mind felt clear. That evening, she opened her laptop and started writing an email not to a supplier or a buyer, but to the Civil Aviation Authority. She wanted to volunteer to speak at traveler awareness sessions, to share her story so others wouldn't make the same mistake. It was time, she thought, to rebuild her life, but this time, on honesty. Outside her window, the sky was turning orange and gold as the sun began to set. It was a peaceful end to a stormy chapter. Karen smiled faintly, feeling something she hadn't in a long while. Peace. The airport, the officers, the humiliation, it all led her here, to a moment of realization. Rules existed not to shame people, but to protect them. And sometimes a painful experience was the only way to uncover the truth within ourselves. As the evening breeze swept through her window, she whispered softly to herself, "Never again." And for once, she truly meant it.